All right, hello everyone. I'm Eric Ness and welcome to today's webinar, which is hosted by the Clean Energy Solutions Center in partnership with the United Nations Foundation's Energy Access Practitioner Network. Today's webinar is focused on the global plan of action, mainstreaming sustainable energy solutions in displacement settings. I'm not able to advance to the next slide. There we go. Before we begin, I'll quickly go over some of the webinar features. For audio, you have two options. You may either listen through your computer or over your telephone. If you choose to listen through your computer, please select the mic and speakers option in the audio pane. Doing so will eliminate the possibility of feedback and echo. If you choose to dial in by phone, please select the telephone option, and the box on the right side will display the telephone number and audio pin you should use to dial in. If anyone is having technical difficulties with the webinar, you may contact the GoToWebinars help desk at 888-259-3826 for assistance. If you'd like to ask a question, please use the questions pane where you may type in your question. Also, the audio recording and presentations will be posted to the Solutions Center training page within a few days of the broadcast and will be added to the Solutions Center YouTube channel, where you'll find other informative webinars as well as video interviews with thought leaders on clean energy policy topics. Finally, one important note of mention before we begin our presentations is that the Clean Energy Solutions Center does not endorse or recommend specific products or services. Information provided in this webinar is featured in the Solutions Center's resource library as one of many best practice resources reviewed and selected by technical experts. Today's webinar agenda is centered around the presentations from our guest panelists, Thomas Fogrub with Christian Gulot and Kathleen Callahy, who have joined us to discuss how the Global Plan of Action Framework works to support and amplify the New York Declaration for Refugees and Migrants, the Agenda for Humanity, as well as existing energy and humanitarian interventions. Before we jump into the presentations, I'll provide a quick overview of the Clean Energy Solutions Center, and Luke Severy from the United Nations Foundation will provide a quick overview of the Energy Access Practitioner Network. Then, following the panelists' presentations, we'll have a question and answer session where the panelists will address questions submitted by the audience. At the end of the webinar, you'll be automatically prompted to fill out a brief survey as well, so thank you in advance for taking a moment to respond. The Solutions Center was launched in 2011 under the Clean Energy Ministerial. The Clean Energy Ministerial is a high-level global forum to promote policies and programs that advance clean energy technology, to share lessons learned and best practices, and to encourage the transition to a global clean energy economy. 24 countries in the European Commission are members, contributing 90% of clean energy investment and responsible for 75% of global greenhouse gas emissions. This webinar is provided by the Clean Energy Solutions Center, which focuses on helping government policymakers design and adopt policies and programs that support the deployment of clean energy technologies. This is accomplished through support in crafting and implementing policies relating to energy access, no-cost expert policy assistance, and peer-to-peer learning and training tools such as this webinar. The Clean Energy Solutions Center is co-sponsored by the governments of Australia, Sweden, and the United States, with in-kind support from the government of Chile. The Solutions Center provides several clean energy policy programs and services, including a team of over 60 global experts that can provide remote and in-person technical assistance to governments and also government-supported institutions. No-cost virtual webinar trainings on a variety of clean energy topics, partnership building with development agencies and regional and global organizations to deliver support, and an online library containing over 5,500 clean energy policy-related publications, tools, videos, and other resources. Our primary audience is made up of energy policymakers and analysts from governments and technical organizations in all countries, but we also strive to engage with the private sector, NGOs, and civil society. The Solutions Center is an international initiative that works with more than 35 international partners across its suite of different programs. Several of the partners are listed above and include research organizations like IRENA and the IEA, programs like SE for All, and regionally focused entities such as the ECOWAS Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency. A marquee feature that the Solutions Center provides is the no-cost expert policy assistance known as Ask an Expert. The Ask an Expert service matches policymakers with one of the more than 60 global experts selected as authoritative leaders on specific clean energy finance and policy topics. For example, in the area of renewable energy policy, we're pleased to have Louis Sek, the former Senegalese Minister for Renewable Energy, serving as one of our experts. If you have a need for policy assistance in renewable energy policy or any other clean energy sector, we encourage you to use this valuable service. Again, the assistance is provided free of charge. If you have a question for our experts, please submit it through our simple online form at cleanenergysolutions.org/expert. That URL is at the bottom right side of the slide on your screen right now. We also invite you to spread the word about this service to those in your networks and organizations. Today's webinar is co-moderated by Luc Severi, who is manager of the UN Foundation's Energy Access activities, focusing primarily on the energy access gap in the health sector. Now I'd like to provide a brief introduction to today's panelists. First up today is Thomas Fogrup, who is head of the Renewable Energy Solutions team at the United Nations Institute for Training and Research, or UNITAR. And our final speaker today is Kathleen Callaghy, who is Senior Program Associate for the Humanitarian Program at the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves, an initiative of the United Nations Foundations. And with those introductions, I'd like to welcome Luc to the webinar.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night for some of you even. Welcome to this webinar on mainstreaming sustainable energy solutions in displacement settings, or as we call the Global Plan of Action, and sometimes even the GPA, because we love a good acronym, of course. Before we delve into the subject matter of the day, I just want to provide a quick introduction to the Energy Access Practitioner Network, which the UN Foundation started up about 7 years ago in support of the Sustainable Energy for All initiative before it was a full-fledged organization. Let me move slides in a second. There we go. So the Practitioner Network currently has about 2,500 members, representing collectively over 1,400 organizations. It's a free network. Anyone who's active in this space, in the energy access space, can join it and can take advantage of some of the activities that we do and some of the information sharing objectives of the Energy Access Practitioner Network. For example, we share a bi-monthly newsletter. These webinars clearly are also part of how we try to influence the sector and how we try to put our finger on the pulse to see what is happening, what's shaking, and what are some of these exciting new innovations that will hopefully allow us to reach SDG 7 by 2030. In addition to the Energy Access Practitioner Network, and pretty much as a spin-off, we also run the Mini Grids Partnership, which brings together a range of different stakeholders, from investors to private sector actors to policymakers and so forth. 274 actors in total together make up the Mini Grids Partnership. You can see all the logos below in terms of who's on the steering committee. The other, oh, apologies, I moved too fast. There we go. Today's webinar will talk about the Global Plan of Action. I'm going to let Thomas and Christian and Kathleen talk much more about it in further detail, because they're truly the experts on the Global Plan of Action. The purpose of today's webinar is really to learn about how the Global Plan of Action was developed, why it was developed, and how we see it evolving in the future, clearly with some caveats, with some assumptions, and with some hopes. But we really feel that this can be a tool for accelerating the progress on how we can deploy energy in a sustainable way in what we call situations of displacement. So following my last slide here, we'll have Christian provide a quick introduction to some energy and humanitarian settings statistics and some laying the land, setting the scene a little bit, followed by Thomas from Unitar, who will really go in depth and discuss the genesis of the Global Plan of Action much more. This will be followed by a landscaping exercise, as well as further focus on what the different working groups are under the Global Plan of Action by Kathleen from the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stalls. And then we'll have a two-part question and answer session. The first one is the one that we've been crowdsourcing some questions from all of you in the last few weeks to get a sense of what are some of the questions that you have regarding the Global Plan of Action, even if you've read the executive summary or the full report, which is available and which we continuously try to share as widely as we can for feedback. So that's the first part, which we call a moderated frequently asked questions, which we'll do amongst ourselves here. And that can be followed by some Q&A from all of you. So we do really want to encourage you to use the question box in your little panels on the side to ask the questions that you have regarding the Global Plan of Action, because this is really, it's not the only, but this is a great opportunity for all of you to really ask the experts who have been working on this from day zero to better understand what is this Global Plan of Action, who is involved, how can I get involved, should I get involved, me or my organization. So that being said, I just want to put this slide up for all of you who's interested in joining the EAPN, the Energy Access Practitioner Network, or just have a question regarding what we do and how we do it. info@energyaccess.org. Before I hand over to Christian, just here totally at the bottom, feel free to communicate with us today, but also in the future on social media, using the hashtags and the handles mentioned. I think for today, especially the one #humanitarianenergy is the one that we will be using to talk about the webinar. With all that being said, I'd happily introduce Christian Guillot from UNHCR, who is the Senior Energy Officer.
Yes, let me first of all thank you all for organizing it. We are happy to contribute to this webinar. When I say we have quite a crowd in the room here. We have, or with me is the Energy GPA team, consisting of Mark, Amy, and Marie. And we also have a special guest today, James Hazelip from UNEP DTO is also with us. And so they can all, in the last part of the webinar, answer questions related to their respective working areas. Thank you all also to the participants who have an interest in the topic. And yeah, let me describe a little bit what the energy situation in displacement is. When we talk about energy in displacement, we basically distinguish between two aspects. It is energy for households and energy for infrastructure. And as you may be all aware, we have a rising number of migrants and refugees. So we call them displaced people. In the last couple of years, the latest figure is 68 million people are displaced, and then an additional 25 million people are displaced by sort of natural disasters. In total, the latest figure is 130 million people that are currently get assistance by the humanitarian actors all over the place. And we have a few data about the energy situation, especially when it comes to refugees and refugee camps. And you can see it in your screen, 90% of all refugees don't have access to electricity, and 80% rely on solid fuels for cooking. This is, in many cases, very much similar to the host communities. In some cases, it's not. So It's again, it very much depends on the specific circumstances. This is the household component. On the other hand, when it comes to infrastructure, most of, especially camps, are in areas where there's no grid, meaning we have to produce, the international community, the humanitarian actors have to produce the electricity needed for water pumping, for health posts, for police, for officers, and so on, by diesel generators or by fossil fuel generators. And that is not only causing some environmental damages, this is also a question of funding. We expect that there are that we spend more than $100 million per year just for the diesel to be burned in these camps to produce electricity. And on the other hand, and this is the sort of good news, and this is also one of the bases for our efforts, we see that there is a political push also to rethink energy.
Sorry for that. So thank you very much, Thomas. So I could not hear what you were saying. So if you allow me just to go through the four subjects, may I start from that?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you. So I was saying before, thank you very much for the invitation for participation to this webinar and for this launch. So we'll just summarize four subjects: the demographic aspect, the strategic aspect, the operational aspect, and a bit of a financial and investment aspect related to UNHCR mandates and energy portfolio. So the first one is, I don't know if you have already covered this, but just to remind that regarding the UNHCR mandates regarding the 30% of the entire forced by displaced people worldwide, this is where we are working with our mandate for the protection and also to find this durable solution that you were probably referring to. Out of these 30%, out of the 70 million people, there is about 80% that of those people, they have a very minimal access to energy for cooking, lighting, educational, and livelihood. And those are our operational priority. Out of these, 85% of the world's population are in developing countries. And today, with the recent figure that we have the large countries where we are engaged are Turkey, Uganda, Pakistan, and now, as you know, with Bangladesh. So that's a bit the demographic aspect that really framed the situation from our side. From the strategical perspective, we are focusing on three main categories of intervention. The first one being the energy for the clean cooking. The second one being the basic electricity and lighting and electrification. And the third one is the institutional energy and the academic aspect related with the energy sector. In terms of the strategic steps from our side, we are now ending this 2014 and 2018 SAFE strategy. And now we are starting to work with the new strategic plan for probably the period of 2019 to 21 to 23, but align with the SDGs 7 to 2030, and of course, align with the New York Declaration. So that's what we are currently doing. Also within what you probably have heard from UNHCR, this decentralization to reinforce and support the field operation. So we are now working actively to have this act mapping and these key partnerships to be able to develop this strategic plan that we want to be ready by the beginning, mid of 2019. Regarding the more operational figures, I will say that UNHCR is currently present in 128 countries, but from an energy point of view and budgeted activities, we are present in 21 countries globally. And as you were probably mentioning, we are focusing on these two categories, the infrastructure, covering public lighting, powering with companies, national, internationals, but also with the very important one, the domestic household needs related with cooking, lighting, heating, and other aspect powering to merge the infrastructure to the domestic. So those are the operational figures. In terms of staffing, globally, there is around 12,000 staff globally. And for the energy, which is a very small unit, we have 12 positions between the field and Geneva. Regarding the last part for overview is related with the financing and the investment. We are following three lines. The first one is really to develop sustainable approaches for solutions related between the fuel and the cooking and power with private and public partners, also including the academic partners. The second part is really to develop these international financial institution and collaboration to see not only to invest on assets, but also on services. So this is a subject that we want to develop in. And the third one is, of course, to engage more with the refugees and the civil society. So this is to provide you a bit the overall about the situation today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christian. And yes, as you've heard, these I'm coming back to a few of these numbers in a minute. And this was the situation in the sphere of UNHCR. As you will probably all know, UNHCR is one of the key actors, and certainly not the only one. And also in the field, UNHCR is working very closely with several implementing partners, and that's why, or this is also part of the answer why we need this global plan of action. And I'm trying to come to the next slide now, and this is what I would like to talk about to you. So why do we actually need this global plan of action? And I could make it easy and say, well, 90% access is not something we want to achieve. We all agreed, or the heads of states agreed to 100% access in the next 12 years with the SG7. But it's only, of course, part of the answer. And let me, before I come to our vision and to our big goal, talk a bit more about the challenges in the field. And it is also connected to what Christian said. The first challenge we identified is energy is not a formal priority in humanitarian assistance. And we are not saying it should be in a sense that, for example, we would need an energy cluster in the humanitarian sphere. But at least we all working on the goal to put energy a bit higher on the agenda and to include energy in operations and in implementations. Second challenge. Displaced people are not included in national or international energy access agenda. The people we are talking about, they live very often in isolated areas. They're often marginalized, and they live in areas where host countries often cannot provide enough resources for their own population, for the host populations. So in that sense, as coming back to SDG7, we all agreed that we want to have access to everybody, give access to everybody, sustainable energy access in the next 12 years. This should also include refugees and migrants. The next challenge, energy and displacement, is underfunded. And to be fully true, we would say it is underfunded for a large scale investment in sustainable energy solutions. For example, what I mean with that is when it comes to providing enough diesel to run operations, it would be fair to argue that this is underfunded. There is enough in most operations, enough funding for providing the diesel, but in terms of providing access to energy, to sustainable energy, to provide, for example, clean cooking solutions for the households, there's certainly not enough funding in the system. And this is also something we want to work on. Next challenge, expertise and capacity. We heard from Christian that there are 12,000 people working for UNHCR, and Christian, you probably don't mind if I say only 12 energy experts. And of course, our argument is not to create 200 more posts for electricians within UNHCR, but as I explained earlier, UNHCR is very much working in the field with implementing partners. And if we can all work together, and if we can all trying to improve the capacity of these implementing partners and all the partners that are involved in the sector, we would achieve a lot. And the last point, there's not enough data out there, and there's not enough data that has been shared out there. There's certainly, and there are certainly enough pilot projects out there, and everybody who heard me talking before knows that I like to talk about pilot initiatives we have in the system. So I think we actually have too many pilots which we don't enough learn from, and where a scaling up is not foreseen from the beginning. So on the other hand, we need data, we need proper data, we need evidence, we need monitoring to prove that our interventions are on a solid basis, and that it actually makes sense for donors to come in and invest in energy situations or energy projects. So these were the challenges we identified, well, almost a good 9 months ago, with a small bunch of people trying to change the situation. Among them, UNHCR and UNDESA and some of the now steering group members of the GPA, and then someone at UNHCR and UNDESA told us that yeah, there's this, we would need something like a global plan, and we started working on that, and we defined a document, and I'm coming back to this later, where we stand right now. We defined a document with a clear vision for us in line with the SDG 7 goal. Every person affected by conflict and natural disaster has access to affordable, reliable, sustainable and modern energy service by 2030. Those of you who are engaged in the energy sphere knows that this is only 1/3 of the goals that come along with SDG 7. The other ones, the other two are also important for us, but since we are focusing on the people, we mention only this vision. But however, of course, part of the whole GPA effort is also to increase the uptake of renewables in the sector and also increase energy efficiency. So we don't neglect the other two parts of the SDG 7, but of course the people are in the center of our ambitions. So the GPA is a consortium. The GPA is a non-binding framework to provide concrete actions and assistance to a more systematic and collaborative approach on sustainable energy. And we want to give the stakeholders that are involved the resources to mainstream sustainable energy into their programming and implementation. In the next part, I will tell you a little bit where we stand and what we did in the past couple of months. As I said, the whole idea started roughly 9 months ago, and in January 2018, January this year, we had a conference in Berlin with roughly 120 experts, and unlike some of the conferences that probably you have seen and visited before, that was a pretty tough conference, because actually we asked people to work. and this for almost 2 days. And so we all sat together, we defined these challenges that I just described, but we also defined a number of answers to these challenges and or potential answers. And we also defined based on these 5 challenges, 5 working groups. And these 5 working groups, they drafted the document that has been, which is now the GPA Framework, in the time between February and June. And in July, we launched this document in New York during the High-Level Political Forum. Why New York and why the High-Level Political Forum? Because this year, the SG7 was part of the review mechanism in New York, and so we thought it is perfect timing to also launch our document. And we didn't launch only the document, we also established the support structure, which I will tell you about in the next slide. And where do we stand now? Now it's September, and based on the framework, in the framework, we have roughly 65 recommendations. And based on these recommendations, we are now developing a concrete work plan with activities for the next 2 to 3 years. And we will most likely launch this or publish this, this work plan in January, early 19. And part of these activities, or part of the activity to develop this work plan is, of course, also a stakeholder mapping. So we will sit together with all our partners, not only those in the steering group, but also those who are working in the different working groups. And of course, one of the reasons why we're doing this webinar today is also to find new partners. We want to sit with you together and see where are your needs, where are you already working on very concrete topics, where can we all learn from what you achieved in your topics, in your projects, and how can the whole sector benefit from that in order to really achieve a difference. And to achieve this, we have established, as I said earlier, the GPA support structure. And you can see in the outer circle the 5 working groups: data, technical capacity, innovative finance, policy and planning, to go clockwise. And again, these are the main challenges we also identified in the first assessment. And in the middle, you can see we have established a steering group with currently 13 international organizations, and we have the coordination unit or secretariat currently hosted by UNITA, which is the team I'm heading here, and we all together developing now this work plan, and will monitor and assist and trying to implement these activities in the future. To give you an overview who is on board right now, you can probably identify a lot of common names that you've heard of, or that you are partnering with, or that you see as your own organization. And we are currently supported and very grateful for the support of the Federal Foreign Office of Germany. And yes, you can also find the email address in there, but we are coming back to this later in the last point when we answer the questions you have. So that's from my side for the moment, and I'm happy to pass it on to Kathleen. She will explain more about the work in the different working areas. Thank you.
Kathleen, all you.
Thank you, Luke, and thank you, Thomas, for that introduction and everything. Before we get to the work of the working groups, to be redundant, I wanted to give us a quick update on sort of landscaping. Where does the GPA fit in the crossover between these complex worlds of energy and humanitarian access. So just going to go through a little exercise. Firstly, energy, as Thomas mentioned, is not a formal priority in humanitarian assistance, unlike the topics that you see here, which are represented by humanitarian cluster groups under the UN system, which also help to organize the aid of various NGOs and non-UN affiliated organizations. So conspicuously, energy is missing from this segment. And the question over the last several years has been, where does energy fit in this picture? Does it belong as another wedge, or does it belong in as sort of a cross-cutting issue? Thinking through it, as Christian already covered, energy really is a cross-cutting topic across various parts of humanitarian assistance. In health, you need power to provide cold storage for vaccines and medicines. You need it to electrify hospitals. You also need clean cooking facilities in order to prevent people from inhaling toxic smoke that affects their health over time. In nutrition, for example, clean cooking will help to ensure that people do not undercook or choose foods that aren't as nutritious based on limited fuel resources. In protection, again, providing fuel and clean cooking can help to reduce the risk or incidence of gender-based violence that is incurred during firewood collection. Lighting is also critical as far as protection or perceptions of safety within the camp and navigating at night. In shelters, you need heating, especially in Eastern Europe, where we have a lot of the Syrian refugees arriving right now. You also need lighting, of course, at night. Power is used for a lot of water pumping and sanitation activities. Solar water pumping is a new area that's becoming more popular. Obviously, lighting is needed for camp coordination and management, as well as education. And an increasing number of displaced people now have access to smartphones and cell phones, but all these devices are not usable without the ability to charge them. And of course, again, cooking is a key part of food security. So the answer to really this question of where does energy fit is it fits everywhere. So as a result, the Global Plan of Action really seeks to accelerate and improve the incorporation of energy access across all of these clusters and sector groups as it makes sense to. Now, as far as where the GPA operates, we've been talking about energy access as a sector. So here you see it like represented, in its entirety, on-grid, off-grid, private sector, and so on. Crossing over with this area of humanitarian assistance. So really, the goal of the GPA is that spot in the overlap between energy access and humanitarian assistance by making sure that displaced people or anyone receiving humanitarian aid has access to energy. Now, there have been other initiatives working on this topic previously, as far back as the Safe Humanitarian Working Group, which both Luke and I are members of as co-chairs, or the Alliance co-chairs, and UNF is a member. More recently, in the last couple of years, you have the Moving Energy Initiative also operating in this space and looking more at how to bring in the private sector and sort of making the business case for energy being a key part of humanitarian assistance. But importantly, these areas, neither energy access nor humanitarian assistance operate in a bubble. You have increasing overlaps between humanitarian assistance and international development, which is recognized in both the Agenda for Humanity and, as Thomas already mentioned, the New York Declaration for Refugees and Migrants, both of which are encouraging the increasing sort of getting humanitarian and development organizations to work together and not duplicate their efforts. At the same time, you have Sustainable Development Goal 7, as Thomas already mentioned, looking at this overlap between energy access and international development, but not necessarily looking previously at humanitarian assistance. So, and of course, this is a highly simplified graphic. I just want to make that clear. We're not showing government, civil society, private sector, but this is really just to give you an idea of where we are. The important thing to remember about the GPA is that the goal is not to get rid of any of these initiatives, but to help coordinate them and to sort of provide a common strategy for moving them forward, a common plan of action. So that includes SAFE, it includes the Moving Energy Initiative, it includes Sustainable Energy for All, and numerous other partners. So having covered that, we'll move into the GPA working areas. This is an image from our New York launch event for the GPA Framework that was published in July. And we'll just run through these. So planning and coordination. As Thomas mentioned, energy access is not a formal priority in humanitarian assistance, which is one of the key issues that prevents it from being properly funded, that prevents it from being properly coordinated. So as you would imagine, the key recommendation here is to formally recognize sustainable energy access as a priority within the UN humanitarian system. And for both UN humanitarian agencies and non-humanitarian agencies, to build energy activities into other humanitarian assistance priorities. So to get people and organizations operating in health, in shelter, in education, thinking about how energy features into their work and figuring out how to incorporate it. Under that, we have define or adopt a global coordination mechanism for this issue. There are some informal ones already in place, but there could be others, and depending on what would be the most appropriate. Another is to update the existing humanitarian planning and assessment tools to incorporate energy issues. I'll say that a lot of the challenges that you're going to see over the next couple of slides are not specific to this nexus between energy and humanitarian assistance. They are broad problems that are, or challenges that are ubiquitous in humanitarian assistance and development. So they will seem familiar. Next, some key actors are barred from participation in these activities. So for example, displaced people themselves don't really have as much access to these conversations as would be ideal. Ideally, they would be involved in the design of energy solutions that they would then use and can benefit from their implementation. Additionally, there are a lot of private sector actors who are interested in participating in this space, but are not sure what the entry points are. How do we begin working in a camp? How do we begin, access UN procurement opportunities? So the recommendations in this area are a couple, and on all of these slides, be aware that the recommendations that are on the screen are not the only ones by far. So we do recommend that you reference the GPA framework, and there's a link there at the bottom, and we can provide you the other link later on, and you'll be able to access it in the post-webinar. So for this area, fostering bottom-up collaborations is key to making sure that energy and environment interventions include displaced people and host community members, which is critical to heading off any conflict around these interventions, and that local experts and energy product and service providers are involved so as to prevent any market disruption or additional issues. Working to overcome limited internet access and data connectivity, which prevents a lot of our partners in the field in areas where network connectivity is not so great from participating and giving their input into this process, as well as working to overcome language and literacy barriers through translation and alternative communications. And on the private sector piece, simply brokering partnerships, humanitarian and non-humanitarian stakeholders such as private companies and investors. There are several initiatives that already exist that are working on this, which we're happy to go into in the Q&A. Second area, policy advocacy and host country resilience. The key challenge here is that displaced people are not on the energy access agenda nationally or internationally. So the recommendations here, for example, bringing displaced people into the Sustainable Development Goal 7 agenda and the Global Tracking Framework, which is one of the means of tracking progress on SDG 7, and making sure that they're included and that progress in this stream can be tracked. Additionally, fostering policy dialogues with national policymakers and related practitioners to help them understand the connections between energy access and self-reliance and how these things create a virtuous cycle of change, basically making the case for focusing on energy access among humanitarian populations. Second, there's a lack of policy frameworks for long-term investments versus temporary aid. We'll go into this a little bit more in the finance slide, but essentially, the humanitarian system is not currently built efficiently to funnel funds to long-term projects. The focus tends to be on temporary aid, short-term project-by-project commitments. And what that means in this context is that there aren't sort of frameworks and rules in place for distributing or receiving those funds. So the recommendations there, support the ongoing implementation and design of long-term response and resilience plans, which is an increasing area for countries, especially for countries that are experiencing long-term conflicts, where refugee camps have been in place for 20 plus years, or, where there's simply, we know that there's going to be people camped for a long time. And secondly, creating clear guidance frameworks on how funds can be channeled through member states, through donors, through investors to these projects, and therefore sort of build donor confidence in terms of what these projects need. Lastly, national legal frameworks for many displaced people are not conducive to energy access interventions. This is a tricky subject, especially given that refugees are essentially not, or refugees and many displaced people are not often given the right to work or to move freely in the places where they are currently living. Obviously, this is at the discretion of the host country in particular, and is something that should be ultimately decided by them. But should it be appropriate, a couple of things could be recommended. One is, in the short term, moving from in-kind support, simply giving products to people, to cash-based support, which is a growing space in humanitarian assistance. And this allows displaced people to access commercial energy opportunities both as consumers and sellers, so they can buy products in local markets with whatever cash that they have, instead of having to sell products that they don't want or need, and that they could be able to purchase, to also sell and be and contribute to that market. And again, on the second part, easing restrictions on their right to move and be legally employed can really help them to contribute to markets in this area. Working Area 3, Innovative Finance, it all comes back to money, as we all know. There is a lack of long-term investments in this particular space. Part of that, as we said before, is due to the fact that the humanitarian system is still adjusting to this idea of conflicts and disasters being long-term instead of short-term. But part of it is also due to some other things. So we've heard from donors who participated in the GPA that humanitarian agencies simply need to ask for funding in this space if they want it, and to say exactly what it is they want this funding for. Currently, energy interventions are mostly sort of extra budgetary and sort of done under other budgets, such as protection and food security. So even just humanitarian agencies going to their donors and saying this is something we could use support on is something that could happen and something that we can help with. Second, fostering discussions among funders and implementers to identify potential sources and modalities of funding to test new financial instruments. Basically, this says let's not just focus on short-term project-based funding. Let's focus on sort of longer-term other means of funding and different modalities. We could design a financing facility or other instruments that could be used to support energy investments in displacement settings. The Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves has prepared a humanitarian clean cooking fund. The Moving Energy Initiative has launched a couple of initiatives for projects in this space as well. And I believe the Smart Community Coalition will eventually start producing something in this area as well. Lastly, positioning funding for energy activities in displacement as part of a holistic approach. So instead of considering a single project, an energy project per se, thinking of it as a larger part of a protection and health project or a protection and gender, or simply thinking about all of these needs in one longer term area. Secondly, and we'll go into this more in working area 5, there's simply limited data on what is viewed as a low return market. From the perspective of a private company owner or an investor, the benefits of engaging in this space are not clear, and there are several risks. Currently, I would say the Moving Energy Initiative is the one that has been the organization that has been looking into answering these questions and gathering data in this area, but there is still much more needed. So, forgive my misspelling there, but essentially we need to conduct further mapping and research on different types of energy projects throughout the value chain. That is everything from, producing fuel to, like sourcing the materials to producing fuel down to providing it to the consumer. Same again for power. And looking at what areas require financing and determining what financial instruments are best suited to each. Is it standard donor grant funding? Is it guarantee instruments, impact investment, access to credit, or numerous other potential modalities? We simply don't know what works yet, so we need some room to explore that. Second, we need to collect data from existing projects on consumers' affordability and willingness to pay, and map out the returns from those projects and simply just learn from what's already been done. Okay, so working area 4, we've only got 2 left. Technical expertise, capacity building, and training. From the perspective of humanitarian organizations especially, it's hard to address energy when you simply don't have internal capacity and technical expertise on this subject, or even content expertise on how to incorporate it into one's work. So in addition to finding more funding, we also need to build in-house capacity for humanitarian staff at both the field level and the international level to plan and implement these interventions and strategies and projects. It's also recommended that we develop partnerships between humanitarian and non-humanitarian stakeholders, such as engineers, private investors, other companies, to sort of share knowledge and build these skills both in-house. And it can go 2 ways, not just humanitarian organizations learning from engineers and companies, but also engineers and companies understanding what it means to operate in a humanitarian context. And third, develop tailored training packages to onboard people into this space according to their capacity needs, whether it's a need for research, a need for specific technological expertise in a particular product or energy technology, or simply in how to the best practices in delivering energy access to humanitarian populations. Second, there's simply a lack of knowledge sharing at the project and institutional levels. There is, energy access and humanitarian assistance has been a known issue for as far back as 20 years, but this sector is taking a very long time to grow. And one of the reasons for that is simply that there's just not enough knowledge exchange. So the recommendation here is to create a common repository to exchange that knowledge, discuss issues, and receive support from peers and experts. That being said, as in all areas of humanitarian assistance, it's also a process of using the tools that currently exist and fully mapping them out. For example, Energy Cop, which was recently launched through Set for Food and the Safe Working Group, is available and is there for this particular purpose, but knowledge about it is not necessarily that broad, and it does have some limitations as a platform. So it's also a process of sharing and improving. Lastly, but certainly not least, data, evidence, monitoring, and reporting. This is the area where I would suggest definitely referring to the framework document to understand all the complexities of this space. But the key thing to remember is simply that the lack of overall data on energy issues in humanitarian settings is challenging for, is challenging for especially fundraising and providing evidence to back back claims that donors should and investors should support this space. The information that is available out there tends to be very piecemeal, country by country, location by location, and done by different agencies at different times. So, priority one is collaborating to develop primary research and core data on key topics, how to assess what technologies are appropriate for displaced populations, how displaced communities perceive and use the energy sources that are available to them. This feeds into challenge two, which is that there's a lack of harmonized standards for gathering and reporting data. So what data there is inconsistent across the sources that provide it. So it can't necessarily be aggregated in an appropriate way. So the recommendations there: gain a common understanding of what information is needed along the evidence chain. So that being from the point at which we assess what the needs are, to determining an intervention, to delivering that intervention, and then monitoring its impact. What are the things that need to be assessed? Second, developing standards and a common set of indicators for energy assessments. What are the things that are key to gather information on? And lastly, establishing support feedback mechanisms for local populations, simply giving displaced people, the users, and in some cases the co-designers, the ability to feedback into this process, because if they can't, we have a lot less information on what did or did not work. Third, lack of data sharing. As I said, there is data available, but it may or may not be public, or it may or may not simply be in a place where people can find it. So here, developing ways to share data and best practices between humanitarian and development sectors. So for example, using non-personalized data or open source technological solutions to share, just like basic big data on users, for example, as appropriate as far as confidentiality goes. And second, raising awareness, as we said, of existing resources for data, such as Energy COP or HGX, which is the Humanitarian Data Exchange. And lastly, going back to the issue of providing evidence for impact, there is simply limited evidence on the effectiveness of current approaches. Even for organizations that have already done projects in this area, they need to, that data needs to be shared, and it needs to sort of be discussed among various stakeholders. So, but we also need to give people the ability to collect that data and collect it well, and make sure that it's done in a rigorous fashion. So firstly, conduct a full review of existing tools and indicators for performance and impact within the humanitarian space. There are a lot that already exist, and incorporating energy indicators as needed into those commonly used tools is one thing that could be done. And another is to design and deliver a holistic monitoring, evaluation, and learning tools specifically for humanitarian energy programs as might be needed. So I will stop there. I'm sure that's a lot to chew on, but Luke will take us into the next, or Thomas, yeah.
Thanks for that, Kathleen. Vicky or Eric, if you could just share the overarching slide that we want to put up right now so that everybody knows who we have on the panel here. We have about 25 minutes left. We will just start with a few generic questions, ones that we also crowdsourced from all of you in the last few days and weeks. But we also are getting quite a lot of traction from all of you right now in terms of the questions. And I encourage you to keep them coming because even if we can't address your questions today, rest assured that the questions will be shared with all the panelists following the webinar, and then we can get in touch with you again to provide you with specific answers to your questions. So please do keep them coming because we know we threw a lot of information at all of you, but that's because there's a lot there. There's a lot of need, and we're still building on all of this as well as the global plan of action evolves. The first big chunk of questions that we got from all of you had to do with how can I get involved? And we got those questions from civil society, we got them from private sector actors, we even get them from national governments, or from even at the lower level public entities. So maybe first for Thomas, and maybe Kathleen can chime in afterwards, and also for Thomas and all your colleagues who are sitting with you, of course, as your backups. How are we making sure that the GPA is inclusive, that it reflects multiple perspectives? What kind of a space would there be for example, for national governments, or for regional safe groups, or for private sector companies to actively participate in the GPA or take advantage of what the GPA is trying to accomplish? Thomas?
Yes, thank you, Luke. Indeed, good question. How to get involved, how to be active. Well, first of all, everybody sees the email, the contact details on the slide. We will also, of course, spread the word in the next couple of months. And as I said earlier, and as Kathleen said, to involve as many partners as possible. When it comes to national governments, first of all, they are super important because at the end of the day, if we can convince them to include displaced people in their national development plans or national energy access plans, then we would achieve already quite something. At the end of the day, this will also be one of our goals to work with national governments, to help them through our partners, to see how we can actually include these populations into their national plans. So in that sense, we and if I say we, it's not about the GPA secretaries, it's about the whole network. We in UNITA, we can't do it alone, like UNHCR IM can't do it alone. So it's a collective effort, and we would recommend, for example, certain partners to national governments on how to realize that, to include these people into national action plans. When it comes to private companies, let me emphasize two things. First of all, the GPA is, and we are as a network, we are tech neutral. So whatever the best solution is in this field, in this region, in this camp, whatever it is, this is what we should aiming for. Of course, we all have the goal to provide sustainable energy solutions, and everybody can define it for him or herself what sustainable is. So this is the first message I wanted to give when it comes to private companies. On the other hand, I would say without private companies, we will never be able to achieve large-scale rollouts of sustainable energy solutions. So to me, private companies are a very key partner, and I don't think that we can rely on the humanitarian actors only. We need also to we need to bring in private companies, and also for them, the answer is on the question how to get involved. Contact us, be active in one of the working groups, provide, if you can, technical expertise, provide additional resources in whatever kind, and when it comes to selling certain products or services, then of course we need to see the respective circumstances. All the international organizations, all the humanitarian actors have certain procurement rules. We're also happy to guide on that if there are any questions for private companies. But I would say this would be the answer to this question: how to involve national governments. Over to you, Kathleen.
Thomas, I think you covered everything that I would have said. I can field more specific questions. I know Luke has a bunch that he wants to ask, so thank you.
Just maybe to follow up on what you said, Thomas, and for everyone who is interested, like, well, these working groups sound great. How do I sign up? Just look at your screen, because we've provided a little a short URL, the bit.ly link there, which will lead you directly to signing up to the working groups.
Yeah, and also, even if you aren't sure that you want to necessarily participate in the working groups, you can also use the same sign-up form to receive updates sent by our wonderful colleague, Amy Jenks at Unitar, who puts together updates every couple of months on the whole process and how it's going.
Excellent. Great.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Thomas.
Jump in also when it comes to resources and how to get involved, how to inform yourself. It's not only that we will also come up with a nicer website. We already have one, but we are working on another one. But there are also a number of repositories already out there. So some of them have already mentioned by Kathleen. The Global Alliance for Clean Cookstove have a wonderful catalog of information. There's Energy COP, their website. There's Energypedia with lots of information, also specific to energy and displacement. So there's also already a lot out there, and we should definitely avoid to reinvent the wheel.
Exactly. Reinventing the wheel is something we tend to be quite good at. So it's always nice to see how we're trying to coordinate and amplify and strengthen existing initiatives much more than just trying to start from scratch again. And in that sense, this GPA was truly developed in a quite an inclusive way, with more than 100 individuals pretty much included from it in this whole process from day one. So that's definitely a very positive development, I would say, especially as it relates to how we want to address this in a more sustainable way. As a follow-up question to how can I get involved, we got a lot of questions about the lack of in-house expertise, and this is primarily coming from both angles, where energy access organizations, companies say, well, we know exactly what to do as it relates to the energy solutions, but we don't really understand the humanitarian space or actors or funding cycles or the political economy of humanitarianism. Similarly, we get a lot of NGOs talking to us and asking us, well, we don't have an energy expert in-house. We know that we want to offer health services or educational services, but we don't know how to actually solve this energy conundrum. So what are some of the solutions that the GPA is trying to bring on to address these potential gaps, or, as I would turn the other way, opportunities for partnerships? Kathleen?
Thanks, Luke. Yeah, so there are some existing resources for this already, but as a first step, I would recommend signing up to at least participate in the technical capacity and training working area. That's working area 4 on the GPA form. That's currently the best way to sort of stay connected to the current conversation. And as you participate, simply tell the group what it is that you need. Part of that is saying, what are the gaps in my own organization? As far as addressing those gaps, there are some existing resources that exist. So the Safe Humanitarian Working Group, which is that little green flame on my first slide, or the landscaping slide, has an annual workshop that is designed specifically for the purpose of both training humanitarian field implementers who are not familiar with energy issues, sort of giving them an entrance into that space, and on the flip side, orienting private sector and development actors to the specific risks and issues involved in working in humanitarian settings. The Global Alliance for Clean Cookstoves typically hosts this in collaboration with UNHCR and other Safe Working Group partners. At the moment, we're tentatively planning to have one in early 2019, February or March. you can send any questions you have about this to energy@unitar.org, but you know, there's also information about it on www.safefuelandenergy.org, and we can get into that a little later.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of humanitarian actors struggle, or even energy actors, they struggle to find the right partnerships, and they, especially with how, for example, procurement processes work in the UN system, or particular humanitarian donors, and how can you get involved?
Right, sorry, I forgot two very important things. So on the procurement side, check out the UN General Marketplace. That's a main clearinghouse for all UN-related tenders, and there are relevant tenders as far as energy products. We post the ones that we find, again, on the Safe Working Group website. But as for going back to technical capacity, one other thing I meant to share was that the Safe Working Group is in a collaboration with NORCAP, which is the sort of expert capacity, deployment capacity of the Norwegian Refugee Council. Basically, they host experts who are for numerous areas, for gender, for protection, for cash programming. And these experts are available to be deployed into situations at need. So NORCAP is in the process of building an energy-specific roster within its confines, and this process just launched. And NORCAP has actually provided support to the GPA coordination unit. So we should actually also thank the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs for supporting this process as well. And over the next 3 years, we'll be building this roster, and hopefully at that point, there will be an energy roster where you can request specific experts to be deployed for your needs.
Wonderful, thanks so much, Kathleen. One of the questions that came in through from the audience, which I actually had also written down as an important one, but maybe I'll throw this first to Thomas. It's a softball, of course. There's only one right answer here. Thomas, when we want to deploy energy solutions to refugees, are we forgetting about the host communities?
Thanks, Luke. Definitely not. And this is exactly also one of the goals and one of the reasons why we established this GPA. As I explained in my short overview earlier, very at the beginning, the situation in host communities is very often not much different to the ones in the camps, or vice versa. And if we trying to improve the situation for the displaced people, we definitely have to look also for solutions or improving the situation for hosts. And if you look at the details in some of the settings, there's actually a huge potential because, as also said earlier, the host communities are very often also in quite forgotten places and don't receive the attention they deserve for. And so there's actually an opportunity to link the two and to let both benefit from improving the energy situation. So this is, again, thanks for the question, Luke, a very important point that we always try to make. If you look for the displaced, or if you're trying to improve the situation for the displaced, also trying to do the same for the host communities.
Thanks for clarifying that, Thomas. It was an easy question, but still, you got the answer right. So that's always good.
Thank you, Luke.
Points for you. I want to take one step back, or maybe multiple steps back, to talk a little bit more about the cluster system, and basically talk about why the GPA needs to exist, and why there's no SDG on refugees, and why energy is not part of the cluster system, and how with the GPA, alongside many of the other initiatives that we're mentioning, we're trying to bridge that gap. I think Kathleen is very well positioned, having done so much research on the cluster system, and actually an attempt to get energy potentially as recognized as an actual part of the cluster system. Kathleen, what have been your experiences?
coordinating humanitarian assistance is very hard, is my experience. And I think it is, how do I put this? It is disappointing that energy has not been given more attention to date, especially since we have known about the problems and risks inherent in not providing it for, again, as far back as 2 decades ago. However, it's not an easy problem to fix when you're faced with what are seen as more immediate priorities, food, medicine, shelter. The energy tends to be pushed aside as part, and thought of as something more of a luxury. I think part of it goes into dispelling that notion that, in fact, energy access is now something that is a right in a way, or is something that should be part of a standard assistance package. As far as the cluster system itself is fairly young. It was launched post the hurricane or earthquake in Haiti in 2010 to sort of like help organize all the flood of relief and organizations that were doing activities there. As part of the SAFE working group, we advocated to the Interagency Standing Committee, which oversees the cluster system, for there to be not a cluster, but an energy reference group, which is sort of like a step down from a cluster, a couple of years ago, back in 2016. And essentially their feedback was that they really supported and appreciated what we were doing, but they didn't want to have yet another group to monitor. And upon receiving that decision, it seemed, given that energy is such a cross-cutting issue, a better approach might be to simply work to mainstream it and make it a common part of those other wedges. Maybe there will be room down the road for an energy cluster, but at this point it makes more sense to treat it as part of everyone else's existing work.
Thanks for that, Kathleen. Yeah, I think within the energy access community, one thing we've been very good at is acknowledging that we are not the end goal. We are a means to an end. Energy access, electricity, heating, cooling, cooking, etc., are just ways of achieving something rather than the actual end goal. It's not about electrons and volts. It's about what you can do with them. So in that sense, it is very cross-cutting, and that makes it very complicated to actually focus on it as an individual item or aspect. Great. I think we're approaching the end we're approaching the top of the hour. So I want to slowly start to wrap it up. But I do want to, first of all, thank all our speakers for taking the time to go in detail about the Global Plan of Action. I definitely want to thank the audience, which has been, we've been numerous in number today, which we appreciate. Feel free to keep on asking your questions. You have the contact information on the slide that you're currently looking at from our good friends at Unitar. You have all the sign-up information for the working groups. You also have the actual URL on the Unitar website for the Global Plan of Action Framework. Both the full framework as well as a shorter executive summary can be accessed. Before I hand over controls, before we wrap up this webinar, I do want to just give 1 or 2 more minutes to Thomas to give a few final comments and to make sure that we end this webinar on a positive note. Where is the Global Plan of Action headed, Thomas? What's the future?
Okay. My goal is that in 5 years, we shouldn't exist anymore. We as a Secretariat, because we achieved what we planned in the working areas, in the working groups, in the work plan. And if we achieve this all together, then energy is an elementary part of the whole humanitarian operations, and we shouldn't discuss any reasons why we change from diesel generators to solar or hybrid systems anymore. And we also shouldn't discuss anymore if we change the cooking fuel from firewood to something else. In 5 years, it would be great to have enough evidence out there that it's actually common sense, what I just talked about. And yeah, we have 12 years altogether to achieve this goal, to bring access to everybody in the world, and also to the forgotten places. And I think we can do it. I think we need to have a joint effort for that, but it's certainly possible. And if I see what we have achieved in the last, let's say, half a year or since January, it's quite something. And we have a very active space. We have more than 100 people listening in today. So we see that there's a lot of interest and willingness to support this effort. And if we as the Secretariat can somehow channel and help developing this would be great. And I hope in 5 years we don't are needed anymore.
Let's leave no one behind, and let's make ourselves obsolete in the process. I think that's a wonderful message to end this webinar. Eric, Vicky, you can take it from here. You can close the webinar. I don't know if there's a short survey that follows, but as far as I'm concerned, thank you everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Feel free to check out all the links on the site and re-listen to this recording if you want to. It should be uploaded in the next week or so. Thank you so much. Over and out.
Great. Thank you, Luke. And on behalf of the Clean Energy Solutions Center, I'd like to extend a thank you to all of our expert panelists and our attendees for participating in today's webinar. We very much appreciate your time and hope that there were some valuable insights that you can take back to your ministries, departments, or organizations. We also invite you to inform your colleagues and those in your networks about Solution Center resources and services, including the no-cost policy support available through our Ask an Expert service. I invite you to check the Solution Center website if you would like to view the slides and listen to a recording of today's presentations, as well as previously held webinars. In addition, you will find information on upcoming webinars and other training events. We also post webinar recordings to the Clean Energy Solutions Center YouTube channel. As Luke mentioned, please allow about a week for the audio recordings to be posted. And finally, I would like to kindly ask you to take a moment to complete the short survey that will appear when we conclude the webinar. Please enjoy the rest of your day, and we hope to see you again at future Clean Energy Solutions Center events. This concludes our webinar.